In October, that would have been an ugly win. Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football, breaking down Texas's win over Kansas, 24-17, and more importantly, a bent toward the Big 12 championship game where the Longhorns reached the pinnacle of the conference for the first time since 2009. We'll take on the winner of Oklahoma and West Virginia. That game, of course, tonight. So again, Texas beats Kansas 24-17. So in October, yeah, this would have been an ugly win, but who cares right now? Texas got into the clubhouse there in the winner's circle for a Big 12 championship berth. Okay, 9-3 on the season, 7-2. Many were a bit skeptical after the loss to Maryland for a second consecutive year to start the season. And then things didn't look good with a loss to Oklahoma State on the road earlier and another loss in the Big 12 as well. But they had a few things break their way. And, of course, they're all set to take on the winner of OU and West Virginia. Okay, no Gary Johnson in this game. The linebacker was suspended for the game for a violation of team rules. 74 tackles on the season, leads Texas. We expect him to be back for the Big 12 championship game. It was not specified how long this suspension will take place. All right, Texas should have won this game handily. I did pick Kansas to cover the 15 points, did foresee this kind of lull yourself to sleep kind of game. In the cold, in Lawrence, Texas, the big favorite, Kansas not with much offense, which maybe gives us an indication of how bad, truly bad Oklahoma is on defense, because the Jayhawks really tore up the Sooners last week. But it being a kind of a plodding kind of Texas got the lead and then just played conservatively to hang on and salt away the win. But Kansas did kick a field goal with 1:37 left in the game to get within one score, so they had an onside kick opportunity at midfield, but it was recovered by Texas, so they avoid the disaster. They opened up really strong with a 98-yard touchdown drive, did Texas. Devin Duvernay had a couple catches on the drive for 32 yards. Those were key. Colin Johnson scored the touchdown from 26 yards out on a 3rd and 10 play. And we'll talk about the difference in this Texas team versus last year's Texas team. Colin Johnson and the passing game has to be the number one ingredient that has elevated Texas beyond what they accomplished last year in just going 7-6. Kansas had 5 straight punts in the first half. That was their offense. 5 punts, 5 possessions, couldn't move the ball. Really no dynamic playmakers to be able to stretch the Texas defense, and that was key in this. Although Puka Williams in the second half started to get some running room. He's a kid that we saw as a freshman last week against OU rip up the Sooners for 252 yards rushing. Just a freshman. And 115 total yards of offense, 103 of that on the ground against Texas. We'll talk about Puka Williams' future and the Jayhawks' future in a future video coming up later today. But they only had 44 yards of total offense as Texas had a 7-0 lead at the half. So the 198-yard touchdown drive was very efficient, was picture perfect, and then after that, Texas couldn't do much of anything on offense. Sam Ehlinger, probably his worst game since the opener against Maryland. 2 interceptions in the opener, has not thrown an interception since the opener. 2 interceptions here against the Jayhawks on a day in which, again, it was a plodding kind of win, workmanlike for Texas. They didn't look overwhelming, but they got the job done. 297 total yards of offense for Texas, 296 for Kansas. So Texas only outgained the Jayhawks by 1 yard. They did have 2 efficient scoring drives in the second half of 52 and 60 yards. They led it 21-0. They led it 24-7. It shouldn't have come down to an onside kick, but the Jayhawks got a scoring drive of their own off an Ehlinger interception. And then they kicked that field goal off a short drive to make it 24-17. Thus, some dramatics there. All right, the difference in Texas football this year in winning a few more games, getting from 6-6 to 9-3, because the output is very different for this Texas team. Tom Herman comes in as an offensive guy based on his reputation at Ohio State and what he was able to accomplish on the offensive side of the football. So we got that fixed. Actually, Texas, surprisingly, although they played much better last year and the results were better, they finally got back to a bowl game and won a bowl game for the first time in a long time. The offense took a step back. They were led by the defense. Now, most of their best veteran defensive players moved on to the NFL. Some tremendous playmakers from last year's team. They had the influx of a great recruiting class, but how much impact would they have on this year's team? Well, a few pieces in the secondary like B.J. Foster, Caden Stearns, but they fell from 31st in scoring defense last year to 58th this year. So what made up the difference in winning 3 more games? Well, it was the pass offense. Sam Ehlinger this year went from 11 TDs and 7 picks, and of course he split some time with Shane Buechele. So he did split time, so he didn't have all the reps and all the snaps for the entirety of the season, but still 11 TDs and 7 picks to a 23-4 ratio in the last 2 picks coming today. So he went 11 games without an interception and threw 12 more touchdown passes. So a huge difference in the passing game this year as Ehlinger became more efficient, made better decisions, threw the ball more accurately, and still was a threat in the running game. And that allowed Lil Jordan Humphrey, Colin Johnson, who caught 4 more passes today for 57 catches on the regular season, to become a threat in the passing game. Those guys didn't see the ball as much as they should have last year. And now Texas can match up against teams like they will next weekend, especially if they play Oklahoma, as they did in the game at the Red River Rivalry. And they match up favorably with Johnson and Duvernay and Humphrey against those little cornerbacks from Oklahoma. The other difference is that the ground game was not exceptional this year from Trey Watson and also Keontae Ingram, but it was serviceable. The ground game was abysmal last year. The offensive line play was abysmal, especially in pushing guys downfield in the running game. The offensive line's developed, it's improved, it's not great, but it's better, and therefore the senior freshman combo of Watson and Ingram, they combined for 130 yards today. Again, not devastating, but their typical output. They'll usually, one will run for 80, 85 yards, and the other guy will run for 45 or 50, and that's their rushing output, enough to keep teams honest. And obviously, they've got Ehlinger as a factor in the ground game as well. Of course, the 2 matchups we could see, Texas-Oklahoma, Texas-West Virginia, both came down to the wire in the regular season. Texas got down early against OU in Dallas. Then they came roaring back and took a 2-score lead, and then they held on for dear life. The difference in that game was actually defense, as we outlined in our instant analysis after that game. Even though they gave up 45 points and won it on a last-second field goal, 48-45, the Texas speed on defense in trapping and surrounding Kyler Murray for a stretch of time, for about 4 to 5 series in which they were effective in the second half against Oklahoma, was the difference and allowed them to come back and take a big lead in that game. Against West Virginia in Austin, that was just a seesaw battle back and forth. And, of course, Will Grier threw that dime in the back of the end zone to Gary Jennings to win the game 42-41, along with the controversial, if it wouldn't have worked, 2-point conversion with the Mountaineers winning. All right, for the rest of the day on Mark Rogers TV, we will be back after the 3:30 Eastern Time window to preview Washington State, Oklahoma, West Virginia, the 2 big games. Take your calls, wrap up all the games we saw at noon and 3:30. What I'm very excited to do as well is wrap up some of the seasons from a number of teams that we're going to see this weekend, like a Kansas, like a Nebraska that played today and have a lot to play for in the future. No more football for them in 2018, but with Les Miles in play at Kansas, I'm going to look at their personnel, see what they have coming back next year. Same thing at Nebraska as the Huskers go down on a last-second field goal to Iowa, 31-28. The Hawkeyes move on to a bowl game at 8-4, and we'll look at Iowa football as well. Right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. Leave your comments. Anything that you'd like to say concerning college football, whether it's Texas, Kansas, Iowa, Nebraska, whomever, predictions, whatever you'd like to mix it up on, as we'll be here all weekend and certainly, again, live stream to preview OU, West Virginia, Washington State, the two huge games tonight. We'll be back roughly about 7:15, 7:30 to wrap up the early games, get you set for the late games right here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football.